Hey folks, and welcome to another edition of Zog Science. Today we're going to be talking about nutrition and getting our first look into it with fungi and plants. So, um, organisms have to bring in enough energy to account for their energy needs, right? That's going to be their basal metabolic rate, their BMR. That's the essentially the baseline amount that you need, and that's just kind of like for all of the cell respiration that's going to be going on in your body. And there is a pretty a strong correlation between the size of an animal and or an organism and the amount of energy that it needs, and that's seen by this graph over here on the left-hand side. Right, mice are pretty small creatures. They have a much larger a much smaller BMR than something like an elephant, which is much larger, so it has a much larger BMR. Now, what's interesting is when we take that and we say, okay, what's the BMR per kilogram of mass? What is the kind of like function between the amount of energy you need and how large you are? And what we find is actually that the organisms that are the smallest consistently need a lot more energy per mass or per their size than a much larger organism. And that's because a smaller organism is going to have two things going on. The main thing is that it is going to be losing a lot more energy through its body, right? Because it has a much smaller size, it's going to be much easier for heat to diffuse out of it. Whereas a larger organism is going to do a much better job of holding heat in, and so it's not going to be using it up as much. Smaller organisms also tend to move around a lot more. They tend to be much more active, and as such, they're going to be burning up a lot more energy, as opposed to larger animals tend to move more slowly, so they don't burn up nearly as much energy. Now, when we talk about fungi and we talk about their nutritional needs, most fungi are what we call saprophytic. Sorry, and that means that they eat dead things. They are decomposers. Some fungi are parasitic, which something like foot fungus, which you can see the lovely picture down there. Some are also toxic to eat, and that's just because of the things that they produce. And fungi do extracellular digestion. That's where they digest the materials outside of their body. They secrete enzymes outside of their body, and then they diffuse the nutrients across their cell membranes into their body, and then they use diffusion to transport the materials throughout the rest of their bodies. Plants. Plants need a variety of different nutrients, although the major ones are SNOPs, which is carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, potassium, and sulfur, although they also need things like calcium, magnesium, and phosphorus. Those are kind of the major things that they need. And it's part of the reason why fertilizer is so important. Okay, most soils don't necessarily have everything a plant needs in order to maximize the amount of growth. So we use fertilizer in order to give them all of the nutrients, including some of those micronutrients that they need a little bit of as well. Plants get most of their nutrients from the soil, except for the oxygen and the carbon, which they get from the atmosphere. So just like with us, plants, when they don't get what they need, they can have consequences, and you can kind of see some of the different examples of what's going to happen when they don't get the particular nutrients that they need. Now, soil is obviously incredibly important for plants, and you've got different kind of what we call horizons or layers in the soil. First one is the A horizon, and this is where the vast majority of the nutrients are found. This is a renewable resource, and the soil will be, consistently being replaced. However, things like droughts can significantly reduce the amount of A horizon that you have, and therefore significantly impact the amount of nutrients that are available for plants. And the roots are the structures that are going to be absorbing nutrients from the soil. Water moves by the process of osmosis, so just high to low concentrations. And remember, we talked about osmotic potential, the fact that the plants are using using adhesion and cohesion in order to pull water from the roots into their vascular tissues and then up through the leaves, where it's just continuously being pulled through. Other nutrients are moved in through diffusion, but how does a plant make those nutrients available? Because sometimes those nutrients are locked up in soil particles. Well, they use this technique called cation exchange. This is how they get positive ions into themselves. What they do is that they will pump hydrogen ions into the soil. Those hydrogen ions will then attach to soil particles, which other nutrient ions are attached to. Those nutrient ions then pop off of the soil particles and can then be absorbed via diffusion into the root hairs and then in through the rest of the plants. Plants also rely heavily on symbiotic relationships in order to get the nutrients that they need, particularly with bacteria and fungi. So, plant bacteria symbiosis is very important for nitrogen uptake. That's because most of the nitrogen that is found in the earth is inert in two. It's not going to react. Plants can't really absorb it. And so that nitrogen gas needs to be converted into something like either nitrate or ammonium, which can then be absorbed into the plants and used in various plant processes. Now, how this takes place is that we have nitrogen gas that will be taken by nitrogen-fixing bacteria and turned into ammonia, which can then be converted into ammonium when it reacts with a hydrogen ion in the soil. We can also have organic material, or which is called humus, not hummus. Two M's would be humus. But that humus can be turned by ammodifying bacteria into ammonia. So all of these steps go through ammonia. The ammonia gets turned into ammonium. The ammonium can either then be turned through nitrifying bacteria into nitrate, or it can be taken up directly by the plants. The nitrate can then be converted by denitrifying bacteria back into gas, or again absorbed by the plants and used in various cellular processes. There are also lots of fungi plant symbiosis, so not just bacteria. What we have are these things called mycorrhizae, and these are fungal root symbiosis. So what happens is that the fungal body kind of surrounds the roots, and in some cases can actually grow into the extracellular matrix, that space between the different cells, and that is going to increase the amount of nutrient absorption by the roots by helping to increase surface area. So there are two different types. We've got ectomycorrhizae, which is where the fungus is actually outside of the cells. We can also have endomycorrhizae, where the bacteria, fungus itself, the hyphae, will grow into the cells of the plant and be inside the cell, which is kind of a crazy thing to think about. But again, this kind of helps to deliver the nutrients directly into the plants themselves. So a pretty cool thing that they can do this. Now we also have some adaptations of plants in order to get the nutrients that they need. So plants that live in nutrient-poor soils, especially those that don't have a lot of nitrogen or phosphorus in them, are going to need some way to get that nitrogen and phosphorus. And some plants have evolved to eat animals. And so there's kind of three main types. You've got fly traps, which we pitcher plants, and sundews. And we saw sundews and fly traps when we watched that video on plants earlier. And basically, the idea is that they just need to trap the animal, digest it, and then absorb the nutrients in order to make sure that they can continue to survive. And then we have epiphytes, which are known as air plants. Again, these are usually found in nutrient-poor soils. A lot of these are found in the jungles. Jungles actually notoriously have very nutrient-poor soils because there's so many plants growing there that they absorb the nutrients really, really quickly. But there are some other epiphytes that can be found in other places other than jungles. Epiphytes means air plants, and these are plants that live on other plants. So they literally are growing on other plants. Sometimes they're parasitic, but other times they can be commensalistic or mutualistic. Mistletoe would be an example of a parasite, where the mistletoe, and remember we went and watched those, went outside and looked at those at the beginning of the year. You can find those just outside the front of the school in those trees near the entrance. And what they're actually doing is they are sapping nutrients from the plants. But sometimes they're not parasitic, and so you can kind of see here that we've got this nice epiphyte that is growing on the bark of this tree, and it is getting some of its nutrients from the tree, some of its nutrients it's just kind of absorbing from the water that falls, things like that. So plants are pretty interesting. They have a lot of different ways of obtaining nutrients. So thanks for watching. Next time we'll talk about animals, and I'll see you next time.